The Crimson Vortex loomed ahead like a predator forged from the cosmos itself, a swirling, blood-red abyss that pulsed with malevolent energy. Elias Thorn stood alone on the bridge of the Aurora Blade, his calloused hands gripping the edge of the command console as the ship shuddered violently beneath his boots. The viewport glowed with the eerie scarlet light of the nebula, casting jagged shadows across his rugged face. His deep green eyes narrowed, scanning the chaos outside. This wasn't just a nebula. It was a beast, a churning sea of death that seemed to roar silently against the hull. And yet, Elias felt a flicker of defiance ignite in his chest. If the universe wanted him dead, it would have to earn it. The Aurora Blade, a sturdy transport vessel from the New Terra colony, had been ferrying a crew of 6 through uncharted space when the vortex swallowed them whole. What started as a routine mission to deliver supplies had turned into a nightmare in less than an hour. The first warning had come as a low hum, a vibration that crept up through the deck plates like the growl of a waking monster. Then the energy surges hit, crackling tendrils of crimson plasma that lashed out from the nebula's depths, frying navigation systems and tearing through the ship's outer plating like paper. Now, the control panels flickered erratically, spitting sparks into the air, and the ship's AI droned its relentless assessment. Hull integrity at 22%. Life support failing. Recommend immediate evacuation. Immediate evacuation? Elias muttered under his breath, his voice rough with exhaustion and sarcasm. Yeah, brilliant advice. He wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, the heat in the cabin rising as coolant lines ruptured somewhere deep within the ship's guts. His dark hair clung to his forehead, damp and disheveled, but his focus remained razor-sharp. The AI might have given up, but Elias Thorn didn't survive 3 tours on New Terra's brutal frontier by listening to machines that couldn't think. The memory of the past hour flashed through his mind like a jagged Hollywood reel. His crew, good people, skilled people, had panicked when the first surge hit. Lieutenant Mara, the ship's engineer with a laugh that could light up a room, had been the first to act. "We've got pods," she'd shouted, her voice tight with fear as she bolted for the escape bay. Elias had grabbed her arm, his grip firm but steady. "Wait," he'd said, his tone cutting through the chaos. "We need to analyze the surges first. Blind running gets us nowhere." But Mara had shaken him off, her brown eyes wild. "I'm not dying here, Elias." She'd rallied 2 others, Jackson, the wiry navigator, and Kalia, the quiet medic, and together they'd sprinted for the pods. He'd watched it all unfold through the viewport, helpless but refusing to look away. The first pod launched with a hiss of thrusters, Mara at the helm. For a fleeting moment, it seemed to cut through the swirling red haze. Then a bolt of plasma arced from the nebula's core, invisible until it struck. The pod erupted in a brilliant flash of blue-white light, disintegrating into a cloud of debris that scattered like ash. Elias's fist clenched, his knuckles whitening against the console. "Damn it, Mara," he whispered, his throat tight. Jackson's pod went next, veering hard to avoid the same fate. The kid had always been quick, too quick maybe. He didn't see the radiation surge building to his starboard side, a silent wave of shimmering heat. When it hit, the pod's shielding melted like wax under a torch, the hull crumpling inward as Jackson's scream crackled briefly over the comms before cutting to static. Elias swallowed hard, forcing the bile back down. He'd told them to wait. He'd told them. Kalia's attempt was the worst. She'd been his closest friend on this crew, a woman who'd patched him up after a bar fight on New Terra and shared quiet stories over cheap whiskey. Her pod moved cautiously, tracing a different path through the chaos. Elias held his breath, daring to hope. For a moment, it worked. She dodged the plasma arcs, navigated past the radiation waves. Then a sudden pulse erupted from the nebula's heart, a flare so bright it seared his retinas. When his vision cleared, Kalia's pod was gone, consumed in a burst of light that left nothing behind but silence. The AI chimed in, its voice infuriatingly calm. "All escape pods destroyed. Recommend immediate evacuation." Elias slammed his fist into the console, the impact reverberating through his arm. "Shut up!" he barked, his voice echoing in the empty bridge. He wasn't angry at the machine. Not really. He was angry at himself for not stopping them, for not finding the pattern sooner. But grief was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. The Aurora blade was dying, its systems bleeding out with every passing minute. He had to act, or he'd join his crew in the void. Survival wasn't new to Elias. He'd grown up on New Terra's unforgiving plains, where sandstorms could strip flesh from bone and water was worth more than gold. At 16, he'd outlasted a 3-day tempest by reading the wind's shifts, digging a shelter with nothing but a rusted shovel in his bare hands. At 20, he'd piloted a junker ship through an asteroid field to save a stranded mining crew. The Crimson Vortex was bigger, deadlier, but it wasn't invincible. Nothing was. He shrugged off his jacket, tossing it onto the captain's chair. The air was stifling now, thick with the metallic tang of burning circuits. His undershirt clung to his torso, outlining the lean, muscular frame he'd earned through years of hard living. Sweat trickled down his spine as he knelt beside a shattered panel, prying it open with a multi-tool. Inside, the ship's auxiliary power core flickered weakly. A faint hope, but hope nonetheless. "Come on, baby," he muttered to the ship, his fingers deftly pulling wires and rerouting circuits. "Give me something to work with." The idea hit him as he studied the nebula through the viewport. The energy surges weren't random. They pulsed like a heartbeat or a storm with its own rhythm. He'd seen something like it back home, the way sandstorms on New Terra would ebb and flow in cycles if you knew where to look. If he could measure those cycles, he might survive long enough to find a way out. But the ship's sensors were toast, reduced to sparking husks by the first surge. He'd have to build something himself. Elias dragged a toolbox from under the console, spilling its contents across the floor. Wrenches, coils, a cracked data slate. He grabbed what he could use. With practiced precision, he stripped a section of the power core, salvaging a low-grade emitter. He fused it to a handheld scanner, jury-rigging a crude sensor array that could detect the nebula's energy fluctuations. His hands moved fast, steady despite the tremors rocking the ship. Sparks flew as he soldered connections, the heat singing his fingertips. He didn't flinch. Pain was just noise. Survival was the signal. The array hummed to life, its screen flickering with jagged lines of data. Elias crouched over it, his breath shallow as he traced the patterns. The surges came in waves, irregular but not chaotic. There was a gap, a window of calm between each pulse, just long enough to matter. "There you are," he said, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "You're not as clever as you think, are you? The nebula might be a killer, but it had rules. And Elias Thorn was damn good at breaking rules to stay alive." The ship groaned, a deep, mournful sound as another surge battered its hull. The AI's voice cut through again. Hull integrity at 18%. Power reserves critical. Elias ignored it, slumping back against the console to catch his breath. His chest heaved, sweat dripping from his jaw onto the floor. He was running out of time, but he wasn't out of fight. Reaching for the comms panel, he punched in a wideband distress signal, his voice steady despite the strain. "This is Elias Thorn of the Aurora Blade. Ship's down in the Crimson Vortex. Anyone out there? I'm still breathing. Come get me if you've got the guts." The message looped into the void, a long shot in a nebula that swallowed everything: ships, signals, hope. Elias leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and stared out at the vortex. Its crimson tendrils writhed like living things, beautiful and lethal in equal measure. His crew was gone. The ship was dying, but he wasn't done. Not yet. "If you want me, FaceTime," he said to the empty bridge, his voice low and resolute. "You'll have to try harder than this." The Aurora blade hung in the Crimson Vortex like a broken toy, its hull groaning under the relentless assault of the nebula's crimson tendrils. Elias Thorn slumped against the command console, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Sweat dripped from his jaw, staining the floor in small, dark pools. The distress signal he'd sent looped endlessly into the void, a faint whisper against the roar of the vortex. "This is Elias Thorn of the Aurora Blade," it repeated, his voice steady despite the strain. "Ship's down in the Crimson Vortex. Anyone out there? I'm still breathing. Come get me if you've got the guts." He'd thrown the challenge out there, half expecting it to be swallowed by the nebula's chaos. Now, all he could do was wait. Minutes stretched into an eternity, marked only by the ship's shuddering and the faint hum of his jury-rigged sensor array. The device sat on the console, its cracked screen flickering with jagged lines of data, his lifeline, his defiance against the death swirling outside. The AI's voice droned again, cold and mechanical. Hull integrity at 17%. Power reserves critical. Elias ignored it, his green eyes fixed on the viewport. The vortex pulsed, its energy waves crashing against the ship like a predator testing its prey. He'd found a pattern in those waves, a rhythm he could exploit, but without a way out, it was just a theory. His fingers twitched, itching to act, but he forced himself to stay still. Rushing had killed his crew. He wouldn't make the same mistake. The comms panel crackled suddenly, a burst of static that jolted him upright. Elias's heart kicked against his ribs as he leaned forward, his hand hovering over the controls. The static cleared, replaced by a voice, low, resonant, with an alien cadence that seemed to hum in the air. "This is Captain Zara'Lyn of the Vyridian vessel Stellar Dawn," it said, each syllable sharp and deliberate. "Your signal originates from the Crimson Vortex. Identify yourself, human, and explain why you're not already dead." Elias froze for a split second, processing the words. Someone had heard him. Someone was out there. He pressed the transmit button, his voice rough but steady. "Elias Thorn, pilot of the Aurora Blade. As for why I'm not dead, I'm still figuring that part out myself. Ship's a wreck, crew's gone. I'd appreciate a lift if you're in the neighborhood." A pause followed, heavy and deliberate, before the comms flickered again, this time with a visual feed. The screen lit up, and Elias's breath caught in his throat. The figure staring back at him was striking, alien in a way that defied description. Captain Zara'Lyn stood tall, her skin a shimmering silver that gleamed like molten starlight. Her eyes burned a fierce gold, piercing through the feed with an intensity that made his pulse jump. Jade green hair cascaded over her shoulders, framing a face both angular and captivating. High cheekbones, a slender jaw, and lips that hinted at a dangerous edge. Her uniform hugged her form, a sleek design that outlined her statuesque curves with precision. Elias felt a heat rise in his chest, unbidden and inconvenient, but he masked it with a crooked grin. "Appreciate," Zara'Lyn's voice cut through the silence, cool and laced with skepticism. "The Crimson Vortex is a graveyard, human. No one survives its embrace. You're either delusional or desperate. Both are wastes of my time." Her golden eyes narrowed, but there was a flicker in them, a spark of intrigue she couldn't quite hide. Elias leaned closer to the screen, his grin widening. "Call what you like, Captain. I'm still here, and that's more than most can claim. Check your sensors. I'm right in the thick of it." He punched in his coordinates, sending them across the channel. "If you're too spooked to come get me, just say so. I won't hold it against you." Her lips twitched, a faint ripple that might have been annoyance or amusement. "Spooked?" she echoed, her voice dropping lower, sending a shiver through him. "The Vyridian do not fear. We assess, and retrieving a foolhardy human from certain death offers little value." A second figure appeared behind her, a male Vyridian with darker skin and a scowl, muttering something in a guttural tongue. Zara'Lyn silenced him with a graceful wave of her hand, her focus unwavering. "Your species is known for bravado, not resilience. Prove you're more than talk, Elias Thorn." The dare hung between them, and Elias felt a surge of adrenaline. He thrived on proving people wrong. It was how he'd survived New Terra's wastelands, how he'd outflown pirates in a rust bucket ship. "You want proof?" he said, his tone light but edged with steel. "Give me a second to show you." He turned to the sensor array, its data pulsing in sync with the nebula's rhythm. A surge was coming, He could feel it in the ship's tremors, a low growl building in the deck. This was his chance. As he reached for the controls, a loose bolt rolled free from the console, clattering to the floor. Elias cursed softly and bent to grab it, his undershirt pulling taut across his back. The fabric stretched over his shoulders, outlining the hard planes of muscle beneath, a body forged by years of grit and survival. He didn't notice the comms feed still running, didn't see Zara'Lyn's gaze shift. Her golden eyes lingered on him, tracing the curve of his spine for a fleeting moment before snapping back to his face as he straightened. It was subtle, a glance too quick to call out, but Elias caught the tail end of it. His grin turned sly. "See something worth saving, Captain?" he teased, tossing the bolt onto the console with a casual flick. "I don't charge for the show, but a rescue would be nice." Zara'Lyn's expression remained stoic, but her voice hitched, just a fraction, a crack in her icy facade. "Your wit is as crude as your ship," she said, though the words carried less venom than before. She cleared her throat, regaining her poise. "Our sensors confirm your location. Survival is improbable. Send your data. I'll decide if it merits attention." Elias chuckled, sensing the shift. "You got it." He patched the sensor array into the comms, transmitting the wave patterns he'd mapped. As the data streamed, the ship lurched, a warning of the surge he'd predicted. "Hold tight," he muttered, bracing himself. His hands danced over the controls, tweaking the shields to match the frequency he'd calculated. It was a gamble, but he played worse odds. The surge crashed in, a wave of crimson fury that flooded the viewport. The ship groaned, shields screaming as energy battered them. For a heartbeat, Elias thought he'd lost. Then the array beeped, and the shields held, bending the surge around the hull. The AI chimed, shield integrity at 14%. Surge deflected. Elias slumped back, a ragged laugh escaping him. "Still kicking, Captain," he said into the comms, his voice hoarse but triumphant. "How's that for proof?" The feed went quiet. Then Zara'Lyn's face returned, her eyes sharper now, studying him with a mix of curiosity and something else. "Our officer confirms your readings," she said, her tone measured. "You adapted your shields." "Explain." "Trick I picked up on New Terra," Elias replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "You read the storm, you ride it." Simple. It wasn't, but he liked the way her eyes lingered. "Simple," she repeated, skeptical but intrigued. "We'll monitor you, Elias Thorn. Survive another hour, and we may reconsider." The feed cut, leaving Elias with a grin and a flicker of hope. The vortex hadn't killed him yet, and neither would Zara'Lyn's doubts. The Crimson Vortex churned outside the Aurora Blade's cracked viewport, its scarlet waves clawing at the ship's failing hull. Elias Thorn leaned against the console, his makeshift sensor array humming faintly beside him. The shields had held through the last surge, an hour of hell that proved his worth to the Vyridian captain, but the victory felt hollow. The ship's AI droned its latest grim update, hull integrity at 13%, life support at 19%, immediate action required. Elias smirked, wiping sweat from his brow. "Immediate action's my specialty," he muttered, though the ache in his bones told a different story. He bought time, not salvation. The Stellar Dawn was out there, watching, but whether they'd risk the vortex to pull him out was still a coin toss. The comms crackled again, and Zara'Lyn's voice cut through the static, sharp and melodic. "Elias Thorn, your survival persists. Our sensors detect your ship's decline. Prepare for retrieval." The words were clipped, authoritative, but Elias caught a trace of something softer. Reluctance, maybe, or grudging respect. Before he could respond, a low rumble shook the cabin, followed by a metallic groan from the docking bay. He glanced at the viewport and saw it. A sleek, shimmering vessel slicing through the nebulous haze, its hull a blue-green alloy that gleamed like a predator's scales. The Stellar Dawn had come for him. Elias grabbed his jacket, slinging it over his shoulder as he staggered to the airlock. The ship trembled beneath his boots, a dying beast giving its last breath. He patched into the comms one last time. "Nice of you to drop by, Captain. Hope you don't mind a little mess." The airlock hissed open, and a boarding tube extended from the Vyridian ship, locking onto the Aurora blade with a thud. Elias stepped inside, the tunnel's sterile light a stark contrast to the red chaos he'd endured. His pulse thudded in his ears, not from fear, but from the unknown waiting on the other side. The Stellar Dawn's interior hit him like a revelation. The walls curved organically, pulsing with bioluminescent veins that cast a soft, shifting glow. The air carried a metallic tang, laced with something earthy, like sage burned over copper. Elias emerged into a wide chamber, and there she was, Captain Zara'Lyn, standing at the center like a statue carved from starlight. Her silver skin shimmered under the light, her golden eyes locking onto him with an intensity that made his breath hitch. Her jade-green hair flowed down her back, catching the glow in waves, and her uniform clung to her frame, outlining a body that was both powerful and impossibly graceful. Up close, she was taller than he'd expected, towering over him by half a head, her presence commanding yet magnetic. "You're smaller than I imagined," she said, her voice a low hum that vibrated in his chest. Her eyes flicked over him, taking in his sweat-stained undershirt and the dirt smudged across his jaw. "And dirtier." Elias grinned, unfazed. "Rough day at the office. You should see the other guy." The Vortex didn't fare much better. He extended a hand, a human gesture he wasn't sure she'd understand. Elias Thorn in the flesh. Zara'Lyn tilted her head, studying his outstretched hand before clasping it with her own. Her grip was firm, her skin cool and smooth like polished metal, and a faint electric jolt shot up his arm at the contact. He held her gaze, refusing to flinch, and her lips twitched in that almost smile he'd seen before. "Zara'Lyn, Commander of the Stellar Dawn, your flesh is intact, which is more than I expected." She released his hand, stepping back, but the air between them crackled with something unspoken. Before he could reply, a second Vyridian approached, Tor, the stern-faced officer from the comms feed. His skin was a darker shade of silver, his eyes a colder gold, and his posture radiated disapproval. "Captain, this human's presence is a liability," he said, his voice a gravelly hiss. "The Vortex should have finished him. We risk much for little gain." Zara'Lyn's gaze didn't waver from Elias. "He survived where our kind have not, Tor. That alone merits investigation. Escort him to the control chamber. We'll see what he knows." Tor's scowl deepened, but he obeyed, gesturing for Elias to follow. Elias shot Zara'Lyn a parting grin. "Guess I'm growing on you already." The control chamber was a marvel, a circular hub dominated by a holographic projection of the Crimson Vortex, its red swirls spinning in real time. Vyridian crew members moved with quiet efficiency, their silver hands dancing over consoles that pulsed with light. Zara'Lyn stood before the hologram, her silhouette framed against the nebulous glow. Elias stepped up beside her, his eyes drawn to the display. "Pretty picture," he said, nodding at the projection. "I've been staring at the real thing for hours." "What's your play?" "We intend to understand how you endured," Zara'Lyn replied, her fingers tracing a control panel. The hologram zoomed in on a section of the vortex, the exact spot where the Aurora blade had been stranded. "Your data suggests patterns in the energy surges. Our sensors never detected such subtlety." Elias pulled his sensor array from his jacket, its battered casing a stark contrast to the sleek Vyridian tech. "This little guy did the trick. It's not fancy, but it reads the vortex like a book. The surges aren't chaos. They've got a heartbeat." He set the device on a console, syncing it to the hologram. Lines of data overlaid the projection, highlighting the rhythm he'd found. "See that? Gaps between the pulses. I rode one to stay alive." Zara'Lyn leaned closer, her golden eyes narrowing as she studied the readings. Her hair brushed the edge of the console, and Elias caught a faint scent, like ozone mixed with exotic spices. "Intriguing," she murmured, her voice softer now, almost to herself. "Our algorithms seek precision, not instinct. Your approach is unorthodox." "Unorthodox keeps me breathing," Elias said, stepping beside her to point at the hologram. There's a path through this mess. I started mapping it before you showed up. The ship jolted suddenly, a tremor from the vortex's edge rippling through the deck. Elias stumbled, his arm brushing against Zara'Lyn's side. His hand grazed her waist, the curve of her hip firm beneath the uniform, and a jolt of heat shot through him. Sharp, unexpected, and gone as fast as it came. He pulled back, muttering, "Sorry, Captain." Shaky ground. Zara'Lyn stiffened, her silver skin shimmering faintly as she steadied herself. "The vortex tests us all," she said, her tone neutral, but her eyes lingered on him a beat too long. The air thickened between them, charged with a tension neither acknowledged. She turned back to the hologram, her fingers resuming their work. "Your map is incomplete. If it holds, it could alter our understanding of this region." Elias nodded, brushing off the moment. "Give me a console and, sometime, I'll finish it. But I've got a hunch there's more to this nebula than just storms." He tapped the sensor array, pulling up a faint anomaly he'd noticed during the last surge. A spike in the data, too regular to be natural. The hologram shifted, zooming deeper into the vortex. There, buried in the crimson haze, was a shadow, a massive, angular structure, its edges pulsing with a dim, eerie light. Zara'Lyn's breath caught, a rare crack in her composure. "That's no natural formation," she said, her voice low and tense. "It's ancient, older than Vyridian records. A relic, perhaps, of those who came before." Elias squinted at the hologram, his mind racing. "The first ones?" he asked, recalling half-forgotten tales from New Terra's archives. Legends of civilization that shaped the stars before vanishing. "If that thing's active, it might be why the vortex behaves like it does." "Possibly," Zara'Lyn replied, her golden eyes meeting his. "Our people have sought such relics for centuries, but none have penetrated this far. Your survival may have uncovered more than a path." She straightened, her posture regal again. "Work with my team. Verify this structure's signature. If it's real, it changes everything." Kael'tor stepped forward, his scowl deepening. "Captain, entrusting this to a human is reckless. He's no scientist, merely a scavenger who got lucky." Elias shot him a sidelong glance. "That's what you make of it, pal. I'm still here, and that's no accident." He turned to Zara'Lyn, his grin returning. "I'll get you your answers, Captain. Just don't blame me if I shake things up." Zara'Lyn's lips curved faintly, the closest she'd come to a smile. "Proceed, Elias Thorn. Shake what you must." She gestured to a console, and Elias set to work, the weight of her gaze lingering on him. The vortex held secrets, and so did she, and Elias was determined to unravel both. The control chamber of the stellar dawn buzzed with quiet tension, the holographic projection of the Crimson Vortex casting a blood-red glow across the curved walls. Elias Thorn stood before a console, his fingers moving over the alien interface with a mix of instinct and grit. The data from his battered sensor array flowed into the Vyridian system, painting a clearer picture of the nebula's deadly rhythm, and the ancient structure lurking within its depths. Beside him, Captain Zara'Lyn watched in silence, her silver skin shimmering faintly under the bioluminescent light. Her golden eyes followed his every move, a scrutiny that felt less like judgment now and more like curiosity or something deeper. The structure they'd found was no mirage. Its faint energy signature pulsed in time with the vortex's surges, a relic of the first ones that defied every scan the Vyridian crew threw at it. Elias tapped the console, zooming in on the anomaly. "It's not just sitting there," he said, his voice rough but steady. "It's doing something, stirring the pot, maybe. That's why the surges have a pattern." He glanced at Zara'Lyn, catching the flicker of her jade-green hair as she tilted her head. "An active relic," she murmured, her tone low and thoughtful. "If true, it could explain the vortex's hostility. Our records speak of the first ones bending cosmic forces, tools we've never reclaimed." She stepped closer, her presence a quiet storm of authority and grace. "Your discovery may be more valuable than your life, Elias Thorn." Elias grinned, leaning against the console. High praise, Captain. I'll take it over a eulogy any day. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the hum of the ship faded, leaving just the two of them in the crimson light. Then a sharp voice cut through the stillness. Kael'tor, the dour Vyridian officer, striding toward them with a scowl etched into his dark silver face. "Captain, we must report this to High Command," he said, his gold eyes flicking to Elias with undisguised disdain. "The human survival is a fluke, not a qualification. Entrusting him with this risks our security." He gestured to the hologram, his tone clipped. "The Vortex guards secrets we cannot afford to lose." Zara'Lyn straightened, her posture regal. "His survival is no fluke, Kael'tor. He sees what our sensors miss. High Command will wait until we verify his findings." Her voice carried a finality that silenced the officer, though his glare lingered on Elias like a blade poised to strike. Elias shrugged, unfazed. "Don't worry, pal. I'm not here to steal your toys, just trying to keep us all breathing." He turned back to the console, but Zara'Lyn's hand brushed his arm, a fleeting touch that stopped him cold. "Come with me," she said, her voice softer now, almost private. "We need to speak alone." She led him through a winding corridor, its walls pulsing with organic light, to a small chamber that felt like a sanctuary. The space was sparse but elegant, curved benches, a viewport overlooking the vortex, and a faint chime from crystalline plants swaying in the air. Zara'Lyn gestured for him to sit, her movements fluid, and Elias sank onto the bench, his jacket draped over one shoulder. She remained standing, her golden eyes fixed on the nebula outside. "The Crimson Vortex is more than a hazard," she began, her voice steady but laced with weight. "Beyond its storms lies a vein of Vyonite, a rare crystal that powers our ships and sustains our biospheres. Without it, Vyridian worlds wither. For centuries, we've harvested it from safer regions, but those reserves are nearly gone. This nebula is our last hope." Elias leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "So that's why you're here, why you risk coming for me. The vortex isn't just a death trap, it's a treasure chest." He studied her, piecing it together. "And that relic might be the key to cracking it open." "Perhaps," Zara'Lyn said, turning to face him. Her silver skin caught the light, highlighting the sharp lines of her face. "Your path could deliver us to the Vyonite, and your discovery of the relic complicates everything. High Command will demand control, but others will seek it too." She paused, her gaze softening. "There's more. Our medic scanned you after retrieval. The vortex's energy left a mark, cellular damage, progressive and severe." Elias's grin faded, his jaw tightening. "How bad?" he asked, his voice low. He'd felt the toll, the ache in his bones, the faint tremor in his hands. But hearing it confirmed hit harder than he'd expected. "Without intervention, you have months, perhaps a year, before it cripples you," she said, stepping closer. "To at most before it kills you." Her words hung heavy, and Elias exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. He'd faced death before, but this was a slow burn, a thief stealing time he couldn't fight. "Guess I'll have to make those months count," he said, forcing a smirk. "Any chance you've got a fix lying around?" Zara'Lyn hesitated, a rare crack in her composure. She crossed the room to a sleek panel, opening it to reveal a medical scanner. "Bring your arm here," she instructed, her tone firm but gentle. Elias stood, rolling up his sleeve to expose a forearm corded with muscle and faint scars from New Terra's wilds. He stepped beside her, close enough to feel the cool aura of her presence. She activated the scanner, its light sweeping over his skin, and leaned in to adjust it. Her fingers brushed his shoulder, long and slender, sliding across his bare skin with a touch that was both clinical and electric. A shiver ran through him, sharp and unbidden, and he caught his breath. "Your hands are cold as hell, Captain," he said, his voice rougher than intended. He glanced at her, expecting a rebuke, but her golden eyes met his, steady and unguarded. "My hands may be," she replied, her lips curving faintly, "but my core is not." The words lingered, heavy with meaning, and Elias felt a heat flare in his chest, a pull he couldn't ignore. Her fingers lingered a moment longer, tracing the edge of his shoulder before pulling back. The scanner beeped, displaying a web of red lines, damage threading through his cells like a slow poison. "We have a treatment," Zara'Lyn said, stepping away to break the spell. "A cellular regeneration process, unique to Vyridian biology. It could purge the damage, restore you fully." She turned to the viewport, her voice dropping. "But it's forbidden to outsiders. High Command's decree. Sharing it risks my rank, my honor." Elias stared at her, the weight of her offer sinking in. "Why tell me then?" he asked, stepping closer. "Why risk it for some human you barely know?" She faced him, her eyes searching his. "Because your mind sees what ours cannot. Because your survival may save my people. And because," she faltered, a rare vulnerability breaking through. "Because losing you now would be a waste I cannot bear." The confession hung between them, raw and unguarded, and Elias felt his pulse race. He reached out, his hand hovering near hers, but before he could speak, the ship lurched violently. Alarms blared, a harsh wail that shattered the moment. Zara'Lyn's posture snapped back to command, her voice cutting through the noise. "To the bridge now." They raced through the corridors, the deck trembling beneath their feet. The control chamber was chaos, crew members shouting, the hologram flashing with new data. Tor spun toward them, his face grim. "Captain, an unknown vessel, Clythar configuration. They're tracking our path through the vortex, closing fast." Elias peered at the hologram, spotting a jagged ship weaving through the nebulous storms with uncanny skill. "Clythar?" he asked, glancing at Zara'Lyn. "Mercenaries?" "Worse," she said, her jaw tightening. "Opportunists with no honor. They've scented our discovery, the relic, the Vyonite. They'll take it by force if they can." She moved to the central console, barking orders. "Shield to maximum. Prepare for evasive maneuvers." Elias stepped beside her, his hand brushing hers as he gripped the console. "They're following my path," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I can throw them off, tweak the pattern, lead them into a surge." Zara'Lyn nodded, her eyes meeting his with a flicker of trust. "Do it." She clasped his hand briefly, her cool fingers squeezing his, then pulled away to command the crew. Elias turned to the console, his mind racing. The Clythar wanted a fight, High Command wanted control, and Zara'Lyn had just offered him a lifeline that could cost her everything. The vortex wasn't the only storm brewing, and Elias was caught in the eye of it all. The stellar dawn cut through the Crimson Vortex, its sleek hull trembling as the nebula's crimson tendrils lashed against the shields. Elias Thorn stood at the central console in the control chamber, his hands steady despite the chaos unfolding on the holographic display. The Clythar ship, a jagged, predatory vessel, had vanished in the vortex's depths after Elias tweaked the surge patterns, luring them into a deadly trap of energy waves. The victory was short-lived. A new alert blared through the chamber, and the hologram shifted to reveal 3 Vyridian ships emerging from the nebula's edge, their blue-green hulls glinting with authority. Enforcers. High Command's iron fist had arrived. Captain Zara'Lyn straightened, her silver skin catching the bioluminescent glow as she faced the display. "High Command moves quickly," she said, her voice a low hum of controlled fury. "They've tracked our signals, your discovery, Elias." Her golden eyes flicked to him, a mix of resolve and something softer, before returning to the hologram. Tor, the stern officer, stepped forward, his dark silver face taut with urgency. "Captain, they demand we secure the relic and the Vyonite vein exclusively for Vyridian use. The human's involvement complicates this. He should be confined. His presence is a breach of protocol." Elias shot Tor a sidelong glance, his jaw tightening. "Confine me. I just saved your shiny ship from those Clythar bastards. Maybe a thank you instead of a cage." He crossed his arms, his undershirt still clinging to his frame from the sweat of the last hour, outlining the hard lines of his chest and shoulders. Zara'Lyn's gaze hardened, silencing Tor with a single look. "Elias Thorn has proven his worth, Tor. His path through the vortex is our leverage. High Command will see that. She turned to the comms officer. Open a channel. The hologram flickered, replaced by the stern visage of an enforcer commander, his skin a deep, burnished silver, his eyes a cold, unyielding gold. Captain Zara'Lyn, he began, his voice a gravelly rasp. High Command has reviewed your reports. The relic and Vyonite are Vyridian assets. Surrender the human and his data. Any delay risks treason. Elias felt a chill crawl up his spine, but he stepped forward, his voice steady. Hold up, Silverface. That data's mine. I bled for it in that nebula. You want it, you'll have to hear me out first. He ignored Kale Tor's hiss of protest, locking eyes with Zara'Lyn. She nodded, a faint gesture of trust that steadied him. The enforcer's gaze narrowed. Speak, human, but know your place. You tread on Vyridian ground. My place is keeping people alive, Elias shot back, leaning over the console to pull up his sensor readings. I mapped a route through the vortex, safe corridors, surge windows. It's not just a path to your precious Vyonite. It's a lifeline. Lock me up, and you're throwing that away. He tapped the controls, projecting the route onto the hologram, a thin, winding thread of blue cutting through the crimson chaos. The data was rough, human-made, but undeniable. The enforcer studied the display, his expression unreadable. Unorthodox, he said finally, his tone clipped. Your methods lack rigor. High Command forbids alien interference in our affairs. Your presence alone violates tradition. Zara'Lyn stepped beside Elias, her presence a quiet storm. Tradition bends when survival demands it, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. The human's insight saved this ship from the Clythar. His route could secure the Vyonite for our people. Dismiss him, and you dismiss our future. The chamber fell silent, the crew's eyes darting between their captain and the enforcer. Elias felt her closeness, the cool aura of her silver skin brushing against his senses. He shifted a point at a surge window on the hologram, his elbow brushing her lower back, a fleeting touch against the curve just above her hip. Her jade-green hair shivered faintly, and Elias caught the barest hitch in her breath, a sound so subtle it might have been imagined. Heat flared in his chest, a primal jolt he quickly buried, focusing on the display. See that? He said, his voice steady despite the moment. That's your window. 30 minutes of calm, if you time it right. I can prove it works. The enforcer's eyes flicked between them, catching the brief contact but saying nothing. Proof requires more than words, he said, his tone icy. High Command will not gamble on a human's hunch. Then don't gamble, Elias replied, his grin returning. Test it. I'll lead your ships through, put my ass on the line if it makes you feel better. But burying this route, because I'm not one of you, that's the real risk. Zara'Lyn's hand brushed his arm, a deliberate touch that silenced his next words. He speaks truth, she said, her voice firm. I vouch for his skill. Allow a trial, Commander. The Vortex will judge him, not your traditions. The enforcer's silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. Kale Tor stepped forward, his scowl deepening. Captain, this defies protocol. High Command will not tolerate. High Command will adapt, Zara'Lyn snapped, her golden eyes flashing. We face extinction without the Vyonite. Elias Thorn offers a solution, protocol be damned. Her words carried a weight that stilled the room, and Elias felt a surge of respect, and something warmer twist in his gut. The enforcer's gaze hardened, but he relented. A provisional trial, then. Your ship will follow his route under our escort. Success grants him temporary status. Failure, and you both answer to High Command. The feed cut out, leaving the chamber in a tense hush. Elias exhaled, running a hand through his damp hair. Guess I'm on the clock again. No pressure. He turned to Zara'Lyn, his grin softening. Thanks for the backup, Captain. Didn't expect you to stick your neck out like that. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable, but her eyes warm. You've earned it, she said, her voice low. Prepare the route. We move in 10 minutes. She turned to the crew, barking orders, but Elias caught the faintest shimmer in her silver skin, a sign, maybe, that she felt the stakes as keenly as he did. The next 10 minutes were a blur. Elias synced his sensor array with the Stellar Dawn's navigation systems, refining the path he'd mapped. The Enforcer ships loomed outside, their presence a constant threat. Zara'Lyn took the helm, her hands steady on the controls, while Elias stood beside her, calling out adjustments. "Surge in 2 minutes," he said, his voice calm. "Bank left, 10 degrees. There's a gap opening." The ship responded, cutting through the vortex with a grace that belied its size. The crimson waves parted, revealing the narrow corridor Elias had charted. The Enforcer ships followed, their sensors locked on every move. A surge loomed ahead, a wall of energy that made the deck tremble. "Now full thrust," Elias shouted, and Zara'Lyn pushed the engines, slipping through the window just as the surge crashed behind them. The shields flared but held, and the ship emerged into a pocket of calm. The comms crackled, the Enforcer's voice grudging. "Route confirmed. The human's data holds, for now. Proceed under escort to High Command's review." Elias slumped against the console, a ragged laugh escaping him. "Told you it'd work." He glanced at Zara'Lyn, catching her rare, fleeting smile, a curve of her lips that lit her golden eyes. "You did," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But this is only the beginning." She stepped closer, her hand resting briefly on his shoulder, a touch that lingered, steady and warm, before she pulled away to address the crew. Elias watched her go, the memory of her fingers on his skin burning brighter than the vortex outside. The Enforcers were appeased, but the fight wasn't over, and neither was whatever was growing between them. The Stellar Dawn emerged from the Crimson Vortex, its hull scarred but unbroken, flanked by the imposing Vyridian Enforcer ships. Elias Thorn stood on the bridge, his hands resting on the console as he watched the nebula recede through the viewport. The trial run had worked. His route had guided them through the deadly currents, proving its worth to the skeptical Enforcers. But the victory was a stepping stone, not an end. High Command had summoned them to the Galactic Assembly, a sprawling council of species that governed the known systems, to decide the fate of the Vortex, the Vyonite, and Elias himself. He glanced at Captain Zara'Lyn, her silver skin aglow under the bridge's soft light, her golden eyes fixed on the stars ahead. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about changing the game. The Assembly's central chamber was a marvel of engineering, a vast dome orbiting a pulsar that bathed the space in rhythmic pulses of light. Hundreds of delegates filled the tiered seats, scaled draconians, luminous etheri, and dozens of others, each representing their worlds with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Elias stood beside Zara'Lyn at the chamber's heart, a raised platform encircled by a holographic projection of the vortex. His undershirt was swapped for a borrowed Vyridian tunic, its sleek fabric hugging his frame, though he still carried the rugged edge of New Terra in his stance. Zara'Lyn, regal in her captain's uniform, radiated authority, her jade-green hair shimmering as she addressed the council. "The Crimson Vortex is no longer an impassable barrier," she began, her voice resonating through the dome. "Elias Thorn, a human, has charted a route through its storms, a path to the Vyonite that sustains my people and the relic of the first ones that may unlock its secrets. We propose he serve as Vortex Navigator, guiding all who seek passage, under shared stewardship of this assembly." A murmur rippled through the delegates, a mix of intrigue and dissent. Elias stepped forward, his voice rough but clear. "I've flown through worse than this back home. Sandstorms that'd peel your skin off if you blinked wrong. The Vortex is a beast, sure, but it's got rules. I've cracked them. This isn't just about Vyridian Vyonite. It's about opening a frontier for everyone here. Lock it away, and you're choking progress." The Enforcer commander from their trial rose, his burnished silver skin stark against the light. "This human speaks of progress, but he is an outsider," he said, his voice a cold rasp. "The Vortex is Vyridian domain. Its resources and relics belong to us by right. His involvement taints our sovereignty. High Command demands exclusivity." A Draconian delegate, scales glinting red, hissed in agreement. "The Vyonite's power could shift balances, Why share it with a species so young and reckless as humanity? Her tail flicked, punctuating her disdain. Zara'Lyn's eyes flashed, her posture unyielding. The Vyridian sustains us, yes, but the Vortex's dangers threaten all. Elias Thorn's survival proves what our rigidity could not. That instinct and adaptability outstrip tradition alone. Hoard this, and we doom ourselves to isolation. Share it, and we thrive together. Elias nodded, stepping closer to the hologram. Look at this, he said, syncing his sensor array to the display. The route blazed to life, a blue thread weaving through the crimson chaos, dotted with surge windows and the relic's faint pulse. This isn't a hunch. It's data, tested under fire. I led your ships through it. You want proof? You've got it. A luminous, ethery delegate floated forward, their voice a harmonic chime. The relic intrigues us. If it is of the first ones, it belongs to no single species. Yet the human's role. How do we trust one so untested in our ways? Because he's earned it. Zara'Lyn cut in, her tone fierce. He saw what our sensors missed, saved my ship from Clythar raiders, and defied the vortex where we faltered. Test him further if you must, but his worth is undeniable. The debate raged, voices clashing like storms. Elias felt the weight of their stares, some hostile, some curious, but Zara'Lyn's presence anchored him. She stood close, her arm brushing his as they faced the council, a united front against the tide of doubt. The Enforcer commander pressed his case, citing Vyridian law, while others demanded access to the Vyridian's potential. Hours passed, the pulsar's pulses marking time, until the Ethery called for a vote. The tally was tight, factions split between tradition and ambition, but the scales tipped. The Assembly approved Elias as Vortex Navigator, provisional and supervised, with a route and relic placed under joint control. A cheer rose from some seats, drowned by grumbles from others. Elias exhaled, a grin tugging at his lips. Guess I'm sticking around, he muttered, glancing at Zara'Lyn. Her golden eyes met his, a rare warmth breaking through her composure. You've shaken their world, Elias Thorn, she said, her voice low, as you've shaken mine. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning, as the chamber emptied, leaving them alone on the platform. The ship returned to its orbit, the vortex a distant glow through the bridge's viewport. Elias and Zara'Lyn stood side by side, the crew dismissed for the night. The silence was thick, charged with the day's triumph, and something deeper. Elias turned to her, pointing at a star beyond the nebula. That's New Terra's system, he said, his voice soft. Never thought I'd drag it into a mess this big. Zara'Lyn stepped closer, her silver skin catching the starlight. You've dragged us all into something greater, she replied, her gaze locked on his. Elias reached out, his hand brushing her side. A deliberate touch this time, his fingers grazing the curve of her waist just below her ribs. Her breath hitched, a faint shimmer rippling through her skin, and she didn't pull away. The contact sent a jolt through him, a heat that coiled low in his gut, sharp and undeniable. You're playing with fire, Captain, he said, his voice rough, his green eyes searching hers. Her golden stare held steady, fierce and unguarded, and she closed the distance, her hand resting on his chest. The coolness of her touch burned through the tunic, igniting a current that made his pulse race. Then let it burn, she whispered, her lips inches from his. Elias tilted his head, his mouth brushing her forehead, a tentative, reverent gesture that drew a soft hum from her throat. She responded, her arms sliding around him, pulling him into a fierce embrace. Their bodies pressed together, his warmth against her coolness, a clash of worlds that felt impossibly right. The moment deepened, time blurring as the vortex flared beyond the viewport. Crimson light flooded the bridge, pulsing like a heartbeat, its tendrils writhing in a dance of chaos and beauty. The ship trembled, a low vibration that echoed through the deck, syncing with the rhythm of their closeness. The consoles flickered, screens flashing with erratic data, as if the stellar dawn itself felt the surge. Shadows twisted around them, merging and parting like waves, while the nebula's glow intensified, a fiery crescendo that mirrored the unspoken collision of their souls. No words passed, no explicit act defined it, but the air thrummed with an intimacy that transcended flesh, a union of trust, defiance, and desire, veiled in the cosmos's embrace. When the light dimmed, they stood apart, breathless but steady, hands still clasped. The vortex settled, its storms quieted as if acknowledging their bond. Elias traced his thumb over her knuckles, a grin tugging at his lips. "That was one hell of a ride," he said, his voice hoarse but warm. Zara'Lyn's lips curved, a true smile breaking through. "The first of many," she replied, her golden eyes alight with promise. She squeezed his hand, then stepped back, her posture shifting to command once more. "We face high command scrutiny tomorrow. Rest now. We'll need your fire again." Elias nodded, watching her go, the memory of her touch lingering like a brand. The assembly had bent, the vortex had bowed, and something between them had ignited, a flame that would guide them through whatever came next. He turned to the viewport, the stars beyond calling him forward, and felt ready for the fight. The Crimson Vortex loomed beyond the stellar dawn's viewport, its once menacing swirls now tamed by the path Elias Thorn had carved through its heart. Weeks had passed since the Galactic Assembly's decision, a fragile victory that named him Vortex Navigator. Provisional, supervised, but undeniably his. The title came with a weight he hadn't expected, a mantle that tied him to the nebula, the Vyridian, and the ancient relic still whispering its secrets from the shadows. Elias stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the red haze ripple like a living thing. The tunic he wore, Vyridian-made, sleek and dark, felt foreign against his skin, but it marked him as more than a survivor now. He was a bridge, a human threading the needle between worlds. Captain Zara'Lyn approached, her silver skin catching the starlight as she joined him at the viewport. Her jade-green hair flowed freely, a rare sight that softened her regal air. Since their moment in the vortex's glow, something had shifted between them, a quiet understanding that didn't need words. She'd fought for him at the assembly, risked her rank with high command, and stood by him as they faced the enforcer scrutiny. Now, with the route secured and the Vyridian harvest underway, they were partners in a venture that stretched beyond the stars. "It's calmer now," Elias said, nodding at the nebula. "Still a beast, but one we've got on a leash." His voice carried the rough edge of new terra, but there was a warmth in it, a pride he couldn't hide. Zara'Lyn's golden eyes followed his gaze. "Your leash," she corrected, her tone steady but tinged with admiration. "The first convoy passed through yesterday. Draconian miners, ethery scholars, even a human freighter from your colony. They followed your route without loss. High Command grudgingly approves, though they watch us closely." Elias grinned, turning to face her. "Let them watch. I've flown under worse eyes. Pirates, storms my old man when I crashed his skiff. We'll keep proving them wrong." He paused, his green eyes searching hers. "You didn't have to take this on, you know. Sticking with me. It's a hell of a gamble." She tilted her head, a faint smile curving her lips. "A calculated one. Your fire tempers my steel, Elias Thorn. Together, we've forged something greater than either of us alone." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that settled deep in his chest, a truth they'd both felt in the vortex's embrace. The Stellar Dawn had become a hub, a flagship leading fleets through the nebula under Elias's guidance. The Vyridian flowed now, its crystalline glow powering Vyridian cities and fueling trade across the assembly. The relic remained a mystery, its signals sporadic, but teams of scholars, human and alien alike, worked to unravel it, guided by the data Elias had salvaged. He traded his solitary life on new terra for this, a role that demanded he think bigger, reach further. And Zara'Lyn was there, a constant presence, her cool resolve balancing his reckless edge. They walked to the observation deck, a quiet space overlooking the vortex's edge. The crew bustled below, preparing for the next convoy, but here it was just them. Elias leaned against the railing, his tunic pulling tight across his shoulders as he gazed out. Back home, I'd have killed for a view like this, he said, his voice soft. Sand and rust get old fast. Never thought I'd end up here, though, steering ships through a damn nebula with someone like you. Zara'Lyn stepped beside him, her hand resting on the railing near his. Nor I, she replied, her voice a low hum. Vyridian captains do not partner with outsiders. Yet here we are, defying tradition, building something new. She turned to him, her golden eyes warm. What do you see for us, Elias? Beyond the vortex? He looked at her, really looked, her silver skin, her fierce beauty, the strength that had pulled him from the abyss. A future, he said, his tone firm. Not just ships and crystals, but people, humans, Vyridians, whoever else wants in. Maybe kids one day, ours or not, running around out there, exploring what we've opened up. He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. Sound crazy, right? Her smile widened, rare and radiant. Not crazy, ambitious. I see it too. A galaxy where our differences strengthen us, not divide. She reached out, her cool fingers brushing his, and Elias clasped her hand, his warmth meeting her chill. They stood there, hands linked, the vortex a silent witness to their shared vision. Days turned to months, and their partnership grew. Elias trained pilots, human and alien, to navigate the route, his rough humor and steady hands earning their trust. Zara'Lyn commanded the stellar dawn, her authority smoothing the politics that still simmered among the Assembly's factions. Together, they faced challenges, Clythar raids, enforcer inspections, the relic's elusive signals, but each trial forged their bond tighter. The vortex became a gateway, not a grave, its crimson storms a backdrop to a new era. One evening, after a long shift, they stood on the bridge, the nebula glowing softly beyond. Elias slipped an arm around her waist, a casual gesture that felt natural now, and she leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. Her silver skin shimmered faintly, a contrast to his weathered tan, and he felt the steady rhythm of her breath against his side. We did it, he said, his voice low. Turned a death trap into a damn highway. We did, Zara'Lyn agreed, her tone warm. And more. You've become a symbol, Elias, a human who defied the stars and won. They speak of you across the systems now. He laughed, a rough sound that echoed in the quiet. Yeah, well, you're the one they bow to, Captain. I'm just the guy who didn't die. He tightened his grip, pulling her closer. But I'll take it, as long as you're with me. She turned her head, her golden eyes meeting his. Always, she said, her voice a promise. They stood there, wrapped in each other and the glow of the vortex, a testament to what they'd built. The nebula stretched before them, its storms subdued, its secrets slowly yielding. Ships moved through its paths, lights twinkling like stars born anew, and Elias felt a peace he'd never known on New Terra. The story of Elias Thorn and Zara'Lyn spread, a tale of a human and a Vyridian who faced the abyss and emerged stronger, together. The Vortex Navigator and his captain became legends, not just for their route, but for what they represented, a bridge across species, a spark of unity in a fractured galaxy. High Command watched, the Assembly debated, but the convoys kept coming, and the Vyonite flowed, binding worlds in ways no one had foreseen. As they stood on the bridge, the pulsar's light pulsed through the viewport, a rhythm that matched the beat of their shared purpose. Elias squeezed her hand, his grin softening. Think we've got more fights ahead. Zara'Lyn's smile returned, fierce and serene. Undoubtedly, but we'll face them as we have, side by side. She leaned closer, her coolness a comfort against his warmth, and they turned back to the stars, ready for whatever lay beyond the vortex. The future was theirs to shape, a canvas of light and shadow, forged in the fire of their defiance and the strength of their bond.